So today is Thursday, February 16th, 2017. I am still Andy Reisinger and doing a follow-up interview with Krista Brewer here in the Department of Special Collections and Archives at Georgia State University as part of the Great Speckled Bird Oral History Project. And again, if you would just verbally consent to being recorded.
I consent.
Fantastic. So, in our last conversation, we covered a lot of ground about your childhood and early adult years, and a lot about the bird. Were there any thoughts that you had since we talked that you wanted to?
If I did, they're gone. No, it was an interesting thing to reflect back, and it's made me appreciate, thinking back has made me appreciate the work of the bird and the role of the bird in Atlanta at the time.
Mm-hmm. I guess where I'd like to start, I don't think we covered this last time. Can you speak some about how race, gender, sexuality, how these issues or realities of just the people who were involved in the bird, how that manifested? Like, were there issues around racial inclusion or gender, sexuality?
Well, there were huge issues around gender. Men taking up more of more than their fair share of the space. There was a group that had started before I came on, sort of a women's consciousness raising kind of group, and I think that they had a lot of conflicts with the men, and that was continuing when I was there. I don't think that group had disbanded or dissolved or something. I think by the time I was there, but there, men were in a lot of ways more dominant in the discussions, and so it was always a struggle. It was always a struggle for women to be heard and make a space. Now, that said, it was back in the early 70s when women really hadn't come into their own as much as they have now. And in the larger society. And so I felt like we were a lot better off in terms of gender relationships at the Great Speckled Bird than a lot of women were out in the rest of the world. The men there were far more enlightened. They just hadn't, developed the practice mm-hmm. and the habits of good interaction with women on a sort of professional level. So that's kind of what I guess that's about as much as I can say about that. But it was a big struggle in a lot of different ways. I think the women that were there before, like Stephanie and them, would be able to talk about sort of a women's caucus that they had, but I don't think we did that while I was there. I don't remember that. In terms of race relations, most of the bird was, while I was there, was white. But I think that we had a political analysis of the importance of African American sensitivity and the importance of being respectful to leadership of African Americans and the importance of the civil rights movement, we were sensitive to the importance of inclusion of being more racially diverse, but we just weren't all that. We didn't implement it very well, at least while I was there. And but in terms of local news coverage, because we were aligned with Bill Cutler. Did I mention this last time? Bill Cutler with the Atlanta Voice and Boyd Lewis with the Atlanta Inquirer. And those are two African American newspapers. Because we were kind of, my memory is we were kind of traveling companions with them in terms of going to press conferences and covering different things. We certainly covered a lot of issues that cut across racial lines. And that was really, important to us.
You mentioned that a real challenge was the implementation of trying to make the staff or the sort of internal participants of the Bird more inclusive or representative. What do you think was the big challenge implementing, or the hurdle that y'all just didn't get over?
No, I really, well, I think it's the hurdle that probably many groups and organizations still struggle with. That you seek out people that are kind of like you. You might say to your white friend, "Oh, here's a job that you might be interested in," or would you, why don't you volunteer for this job? And it's just like, I think these were, the Bird folks were, had one foot in the hippie world, and the hippie world wasn't really very racially diverse either. And the anti-war movement wasn't very racially diverse. And so I think it was just, something that they weren't all that proactive about being more inclusive. And, it was also a real different time racially in this city, in that, for one thing, we were just white and black. That's all we had here. Had very few other people of color. And, all of us had to have come from some level of privilege. They may not like to admit it. Some of the former staffers may not have liked to have admitted it, but we all came from some level of privilege. And there were not a lot of young African American people that were, had a foot in the hippie movement, number one, and had the level of privilege that they could just take off and work for $60 a week, and that we hardly ever got paid. And so I think that sadly, it's a little bit like we've still got in terms of groups, neighborhoods, organizations not being very very diverse.
Mm.
And I think that today we know that we need to be more proactive. And I think we just weren't, in my mind, some of them may disagree with me, that we just weren't being, it wasn't tops on our list. We thought we were so cool, and we thought we were like cutting edge, but we hadn't matured politically and socially enough. That's my view. Other people may disagree.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that we were more on the cutting edge of racial diversity than most groups and most organizations at that time. Like Bill Cutler was in a partnership with an African American man. It's one thing that I remember, and
was Bill white?
What was his name? Maybe that was his name. That sounds so familiar.
But was Bill Cutler white? And in a
Oh, I'm sorry. I
relationship-
misunderstood
Yeah,
your.
no.
I thought I misunderstood the way you were saying it. I thought you were saying it was his part. Yes, Bill Cutler was white. He's unfortunately deceased.
Mm.
He would have been a really good one to interview.
Mhm.
Yeah, he was white, and they lived over in the West Side. And he died. Bill Cutler died of AIDS.
Mhm.
His partner name was named Edwin. And he was a photographer of some level of skill.
Mhm. You just mentioned that one impediment towards to having folks that might not have as much privilege working at the paper was getting paid $60 a week. And you also said when we got paid or something to that effect. Were there times where you guys went without paychecks?
Well, in the beginning, when I first started, it was pretty regular.
Mm-hmm.
But then near the end, like maybe the last 6 months, it got more and more irregular near the time I was there. And then I don't know if people got paid after I left or not. I just don't know the answer to that. But
And you left in about 75? Do I recall that
yeah,
right?
I think it was 75.
Yeah.
So I must have started right at the end of 73. So I was there, or was it the end of 72? And I was there all of 73. No, I must have been the end of 73, all of 74, and part of 75. That's what I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I took this job waitressing part-time at Bill Jagger's, who used to work for Georgia State, and that's how I knew him. I knew him from my master's program. And so I was a waitress out at Jagger's Pizza, and that helped me supplement my my income.
Mm-hmm.
But I had a car that my parents had given me. It was a really beat up car, but I didn't have to pay for. I had a car,
Mm-hmm.
and I just. Some of us had not exactly assets. That's too strong a word. But for example, for me, my parents lived here, so that if I had gotten in a really bad financial place and couldn't pay my rent, I could have gone and lived at their house.
Mm-hmm.
And others of us had some other types of assets, or we had some skills. If we hadn't been able to support ourselves, we could have quit and gone off and gotten a job, which is what happened to most of us.
Mm-hmm.
So it was I do think that we all need to appreciate the and we were all college educated, really smart kids, and or 90% of us probably, and we all need to appreciate that rare space and time that we could just take this job for low pay or dwindling pay and work night and day and for the cause. So it was fun. And not a lot of people can do that. Could do it then, and also we were barely out of segregation as the Bird was starting up in the South. And then, so that's number one in terms of how white people felt about it. But then also number two, we had the Black Power movement. Like, did they want to come and work with a bunch of white kids? Hippies. So it was an interesting time, and there was a lot of overlay and interplay of race and gender that affected the interpersonal relationships in the Bird staff probably, but also in our coverage.
You also mentioned the overlaps and relationships to the hippie world. Can you talk about that a little more, of how much of a role the so-called hippies played in
Well, it was really,
in the paper itself, or the relationship to that, what might be the hip scene? Or
it was huge. Because as the Bird started up, the strip and the hippie culture in the city was really big, and the paper, I don't want to say grew out of that, but what happened was the hippies were our circulation system. And they would come and either buy the paper with cash, or they'd get it on credit, and they'd go out and sell it. And so that was our distribution system, and it was also a large part of our readership. And so particularly in the early days of the Great Speckled Bird, the music coverage and the drug scene were music and the drug scene were kind of big parts of our coverage. And so I think it was hugely important. Then as the hippies kind of either their brains got fried on drugs, or they figured they had to go off and find a job, our circulation system was dwindling. And that's when, and the Bird almost folded. I think we talked a little bit about this the other day. And the Bird really almost folded, and that's when this group came in with some capital, bought these vending boxes, and kind of took over. And right at that time, or very shortly after that, that's when I was hired. But we still had some hawkers. We called them hawkers. We still had a good number of them, even in the years when I was there. And so the hippie culture was very key to the growth of the Bird and the sustainability of the Bird, both in terms of its circulation, in terms of its readership, and also in terms of our coverage.
Mm-hmm.
We used to say that our circulation was maybe 20 or 30,000, but because of the nature of the Bird, each copy or many copies were passed around. So we had some calculation that maybe it was 60,000 or something like that. Who knows? But even today, I will run into people that say, "Oh, I grew up in Adele, and yeah, I would get it in the mail, and then I'd pass it around in my high school class." Or, "Yeah, I would get 20 copies mailed to me in Birmingham, and then I'd sell them." And it was really, and it was a very it was spread far and wide. And then we also exchanged, we had complimentary exchange subscriptions with other underground or alternative papers around the country, and we mailed those. So.
And what sort of relationships were there between Bird staffers and the hawkers and hippies in general? Like, was there socializing going on?
I think some.
And
I think
maybe romantic relationships.
Yeah, I think. Oh God, some of the. I don't know. I don't know about that. I think there was socializing. You know, by the time I came on, the number had really dwindled, so I'm not as aware of what went on before, but I think, yes, I think earlier they were very involved. But, you know, we felt like, and I'm sure the ones before me felt like they were serious young adults that had a newspaper to put out. We weren't these, like, kids hanging out on the street. You know? So I suspect that during the height of the hawker system, the staff felt that they had a job. They had a job to do, and they worked really hard at it, and so did we when we were there.
Was there a drug presence in the Bird?
You know, I can only speak to when I was there, and to me it wasn't big. I mean, at parties there'd be marijuana passing around, but I can only speak to what I saw and was aware of, and so I don't know beyond that. But to me it was limited.
Mm-hmm.
But it might have been my naivete, so I don't know. You know, you haven't really asked me much about John Jacobs, and who is now dead, but he was kind of my mentor a little bit. He had more journalism experience than I did. He had come on a couple of months before I had, and I wish I knew more about what he did before. Or he was also involved with WRFG radio.
Mm-hmm.
But he had more kind of straight journalism experience and knowledge than I did, and he, you know, it's too bad that he couldn't be interviewed. He also was legally blind, and he could see things if it were really close up in big print. But he was really a force to. He was very knowledgeable and very, and also, I guess somewhat, you would say, somewhat opinionated, and so he had a big footprint in the Bird coverage during the time I was there. I wish I could remember more about, like, when he left and stuff like that. Other people might.
Do you know whether he was from Atlanta or the South or a transplant?
His parents lived here. No, he grew up someplace up north.
Okay.
But whether he came when he was a kid, I'm really stunned at how little I either know or maybe I don't remember. But no, I knew his parents. Also, I met his parents during the years we were working there. So it'd be good to ask some other people. I don't even remember when he left, if I left first or if he left first.
Yeah. And you think that he probably had experience in the mainstream press?
Yeah, something like
Before.
Yeah, he certainly knew a lot more about how to write and how to interview than I did. And Bill Cutler was really a very accomplished writer and reporter. He left the Bird to work for Brown's Guide for Georgia, which was a publication about tourism and not tourism in a commercial sense, but hiking trails. It was a really good publication. They also had restaurant reviews in Brown's Guide to Georgia. And Christian Lauterbach, who is still a restaurant reviewer in the city, worked for that publication, Brown's Guide to Georgia. Bill, we all had a lot of respect for Bill Cutler and his writing and reporting ability. And then Boyd Lewis is still active. He really moved much more into photography and lives on the West Coast now, but he has a lot of photographs of the late 60s and all into the 70s of Atlanta, and he's had a couple of exhibits in the past 5 years or something like that here in Atlanta.
And he's donated, I don't know if all, but a very large collection of his photographs to Georgia
here.
State Special Collections.
Oh, good. Yeah.
So what would you say that John taught you? You said he was a mentor in many respects to you.
Well, I think I would say how to be a reporter. I really didn't know how to do it. And how to do it, but also how to do it boldly. I think that was the biggest lesson from John, and really from the whole experience of working for the Great Speckled Bird. And then also, probably other people will talk about this too, or have talked about it, that we didn't believe in objective journalism. We had a point of view. We tried to get our facts straight, but we had a point of view. And we were very out front about that. And but we were also out front and concerned about having things factually correct. And I think that's how the Great Speckled Bird kind of grew, how respect for the bird grew over the whole history of its existence. In the beginning it was like just considered just a piece of trash or something that you'd read surreptitiously, but then it just gradually became more of a mainstream public. I don't want to say mainstream in the sense that the German Constitution is, but that elected officials and nobody was embarrassed to be reading it. And I think it's partly because of our, I don't want to say nobody was embarrassed, but that we told stories that nobody else was telling, and we gave voice to the voiceless, and we were, tried our best to be factually correct. I forgot where I was going with all that rant. Oh, what did John teach me? Yeah, just the role of I guess what I now would know to call advocacy journalism, and to be bold as a young woman that really didn't know what she was doing when she started out, but to kind of claim the space that this job at the Bird gave me, or was, and go for it.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to go back to gender one more time and ask if you can recall any sort of specific instances or anecdotes of, you did say that, I guess the guys at the Bird were a bit more domineering and maybe heavy-handed in their having their way. Yeah, do you have any recollections of what an interaction might look like, where that was, how that played out, or also just conversations around or dynamics about what was being covered in terms of gender? Like, when you go back and look at the Bird, there's a lot of coverage of women's issues.
Yeah, that's true. No,
was that a contentious topic? Was it something that was relegated or seen, maybe not even relegated? Was it seen as the domain of, like, women report on women?
Probably women did write those rape crisis kind of articles or abortion kind of articles, but I don't think that it was considered like that was the domain of just women writers. I don't have any good examples.
Mm-hmm.
Just my memory is that it was like there were a lot of tensions over men taking over, men talking too much, men making decisions. And I think there were some real blow-ups earlier
Mm-hmm.
that, like, Stephanie could talk about, but I just don't remember any good examples. I think they had, like, big blow-ups in a women's caucus or something kind of like that. But I don't remember big blow-ups. And also, I and John were out and about a lot. And we weren't, like, hanging around in the office a lot. And it is my memory. And so those that were doing the production work were there more, and so there might have been more conflicts then. But we'd have a weekly staff meeting to kind of decide what we were going to be covering, and then talk about other business kind of issues. That's all. I don't have a good example.
Yeah. And what about in terms of coverage and inclusion of gay, lesbian, other non-normative sexuality? Like you mentioned that Bill was involved and, was living in a partnership with a man. How out was that? And
Bill was pretty out with that, I think. But I think we were all very I think there was some coverage, and there was I don't remember anybody on the staff while I was there that was openly gay. There might have been. I don't think any of them that were on the paid staff. But I think we were all totally copacetic and wanted to. We did some AIDS coverage did we do AIDS coverage that early?
No, that probably would have been.
Yeah, later. I think we were all very, willing to cover whatever there was and to be supportive in whatever way we could.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember that as being much of an issue. And I just thought Bill and whatever the guy's name was, Edwin. I just thought it was kind of like normal. So in a way, and not to be that I was that advanced in my thinking, but I just thought, oh, okay. I didn't think much of it.
Mm.
They were both very nice people.
And doing so much writing, it seems like that was your primary role in the Bird. What was the process, procedure for editing, selecting what would ultimately get included? I guess another way to ask that is, when you were writing something, did you feel pretty confident that it was going to be published within a week or two?
Yeah, they were desperate. Desperate for copy. Yeah, I felt like it would probably get published. It was just me and John. And so we had to produce some copy for the paper. And so I think we talked about possible articles, topics, and then John had some and I had some, and we'd go out and, well, it was just like any reporter during that era. We would do, phone calling and then go out and do either interviews or cover meetings and come back and write about it. And then, I don't remember I'm sure John edited my work. I don't remember editing his, or there weren't many other writers. There were some. I'd have to go back through the paper to kind of look and see who else was writing. But I think most of the other people that wrote copy were either, like, maybe Stephanie would write an article, or somebody that was a volunteer would write an article. John and I were the only two paid staff. And then sometimes we would run things that Bill Cutler or Boyd Lewis would write, is my memory. So there was some editing on my work, I guess. But, if I read those articles today, in fact, when we had the exhibit at Decatur, I read some of the ones that had been laminated, and I thought, oh my God, I wrote that. I was fine. I'm not really proud of this. But it was a different era.
And had you not written it, very likely it wouldn't have been covered at all.
Yeah, right.
So it seems, as you recall it, there wasn't, at least what you and John submitted, and and Stephanie and maybe some other people, you guys were just desperate for copy. There wasn't, you don't recall there being too much like editorial meetings and being like, no, we're not going to publish this, or tabling things.
No, there was a huge battle over classified ads. And what we were appropriate and what was not appropriate for a classified ad. And I don't remember any examples, but there were some that were like looking for a white bitch that is into bondage, and that may have been the type of thing that we would say no to. Or I mean, I can't remember, but in the beginning, they ran a lot of these personal, looking for people to couple up with, and we were trying to kind of ease away from those kind of classified ads, is my memory. And so and there was also controversy about what kind of certain paid advertising that we would take. I don't remember any examples, but we would decline some ads that we thought were from companies that weren't nice, or who knows what. I don't remember any examples, but there were probably some times that we, discussions over whether an ad was appropriate or a classified ad was appropriate.
And I remember last time we talked, you mentioned, and I don't know whether it was the whole span of year and a half or so that you were working at the Bird, that you were living over off of North Avenue. Was it Hardendorf or no?
No. At first I had a little apartment by myself on Sinclair.
Right.
In Little Five Points. And then I moved into a group house that I think I was one of 5 on Bonaventure.
Bonaventure, that's what it was, yeah. And how long were you there?
I stayed there a while. Because, as I left the Bird in 75, I went up, I told you about this the last time, to work for this third political party. And I think I either kept my room or I sublet it to somebody. So when I came back to Atlanta, I came back to that house. And that's when I started to work with the searching titles for real estate lawyers. And that's where we left off, actually, last time.
Did the house did you guys name the house? Did it?
No, we didn't have I don't remember having a name. We lived communally. Nobody was coupled up. And we ate dinner together. I think one person had to cook. You had a night of the week to cook. And actually Cliff Kuhn was in that house.
Right.
Yeah. Other people that don't live here, and then we had there were other friends that rented the house right next door to us. And so that was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm. And Cliff was the only other person that had some link to the Bird in the house?
It was Cliff and this other guy, Dennis, who no longer lives in Atlanta. I don't think he had much to do with the Bird, although, you know, he would come to parties and stuff like that. Who else was there? Bobby Ginsberg. She wasn't really involved in the Bird. She lives out in Oakland now. Anyway, no, I don't think they were. I think Cliff was the only one that was kind of more tangentially involved in the Bird than and then me.
Mm-hmm. And what sort of things were you doing during these years for fun?
During the Bird years or after, you mean?
Sort of this period
whole
of the late 60s, early 70s in Atlanta.
Well, you know, we'd go to music things and depending on who I was dating at the time, some outing things like tubing on the Chattahoochee and trips to the beach. That was a big deal.
Which beach is?
Well, it was during the Great Speckled Bird years that I first went to Grayton Beach on the Florida Panhandle. And I still go there. And then another time, some of us went over to Hunting Island off the coast of South Carolina. And then movies and, you know, just the usual sort of young adult stuff.
What were some of the favored music venues or movie houses that you frequented?
Well, you know, it was we had the Last Great Music Hall, and I think that was the name of it, that had performance, you know, was a music venue. There was also one, you know where the Pitch and Putt liquor store is at Briarcliff and Johnson Road,
Mm-hmm.
that little kind of place. There was, I don't know that the building is even there anymore. But it was a music venue. It used to be like a grocery store or something. And it was a music venue called the Moon Shadow or something kind of like that. And that was popular. There were just a couple of venues.
And where was the Last Great Music Hall?
Oh, you know, somebody else needs to confirm that name because I'm not sure. Last Great Music, it's something kind of like that. You know, I've forgotten.
Do you feel like more downtown or sort
no,
of?
I wouldn't say it was downtown. There was also a venue in that opened up maybe a little bit later in that old mill across from Sears Roebuck. It was called the Excelsior Mill.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that was where the Last Great Music Hall was. A great facility, a great venue. But the thing I do remember is when I came to the Bird, they were all, I've never been a real aficionado of popular music or classical music. But they were all very interested in country music. And so we would go around, and the name of the Bird, have you heard this story? Came from a Roy Acuff country music song that had in there a line about the Great Speckled Bird. I guess it was the title of his song.
Mm.
But there's also a passage in the Bible that Roy Acuff, is my memory, took that phrase, took the name the Great Speckled Bird from.
Mm-hmm.
And have others told you the story of the naming of the bird? Because I may have it slightly wrong.
That seems about right. A
Uh-huh.
couple people have mentioned that.
And
in
why
the
they
founding.
and the tie-in with the phoenix, that Atlanta was a phoenix rising kind of theme, rising from the ashes. And so they thought that was going to be pretty cool. And so they would go around to some of these, country kind of singers as they were coming through town. But Joni Mitchell, Joan Baez, and so folk singers also. They were Arlo Guthrie. So they were, and so I would just kind of tag along to all these things.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of that's what we did.
And you said that that some of your socializing was influenced by who you were dating at the time.
Oh, I guess I said that about tubing on the Chattahoochee,
Mhm.
because I would have never struck out and gone to do that on my own, but yeah.
Did you have a pretty active dating life and dated several people in these years?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you had been married and gotten divorced, and then you had a boyfriend that you drove across the country with?
That I drove across the country with, and then I came back and immediately started working at the Bird, and kind of continued that relationship off and on, and had other relationships
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
off and on, and this and that.
And did you see yourself as part of a social movement at that time?
Well, I walked into one. I walked into it. And during that trip around the country, I don't know if I said this, it was, we interacted with, we picked up alternative newspapers around the country in different towns as we were traveling around, and then we would just bump into hippies, and so it was kind of an awakening experience for me that I kind of didn't realize it was happening. And then when I walked into the Great Speckled Bird, I was kind of already primed for to be a part of a social movement.
Mm.
The ground had been plowed just kind of by happenstance through my fairly progressive upbringing, and then that trip, and my better understanding of my role as a married woman, which I was kind of rejected, and then walking in and seeing, oh, here's this group of people that this is my political home and my social home, and so it was a huge transformative, and I've never looked back, really. I've never looked back. So yes, now and then and all along and continuing now, I see myself as a part of a social movement.
And how would you name that movement? Like, what would you call, like, if we think of social movements as often the civil rights movement or the women's movement or gay and lesbian liberation or environmental.
I have not focused on one aspect of a broader social movement like environmentalism or women, LGBT. And partly that is my kind of nature. I think that's sort of my reporting journalism genes. And that I sort of can't, or I've also said it's sort of my attention deficit for causes, that it's been hard to really just pick. I admire people that have picked one and just stayed in that path for so long. We saw that movie, the name about marriage equality with the Jewish Film Festival it's been shown a couple of times. And this guy, Evan Wolfson, who has worked for 30 years on marriage equality. And I really admire that very deep level, very focused level of movement work. But I kind of have much more of a scattergun, and it's what it is, and it's just hard to choose just one thing. And so, in other words, I look at it as a broader social justice movement, and a movement towards more inclusion, a broader democracy, and really kind of a democratic socialist kind of a structure. A more equitable, a movement towards a more equitable, fair, and just society.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Do you have anything else that you'd like to say at this point about your bird years before we talk some about what you did in your life after that?
No, I guess not. We've talked a lot. It really was just a transformative time. I think it was a transformative time for many of us that were involved in the bird. And so I'm thrilled that I stumbled into it.
Mm-hmm. And so sometime in 1975, you get an opportunity that takes you away from the bird.
Right. I went up and did this work for this third political party for 3 months. And
in New York?
In New York City.
And what was the party?
It had some name.
Yeah.
Like People's Party or something kind of like that. It was driven by this guy, Arthur Conoy, who was a well-known and well-respected civil rights attorney. He was in the firm of Kunstler and Conoy. And, but he wanted to start this and had some funding somehow. And so I did that. I don't remember exactly. Maybe it was just come up here for 3 months. Maybe that was it. I think that was kind of it. We were maybe building for a conference. And so then I came back and didn't know what I was going to do. And a friend said, Krista, another friend just quit this great job. I can't understand why she quit. And it was searching titles for real estate lawyers, and it was good pay. There's no doubt about that, and it was flexible. And so I got started with this job, and it was a real dead-end job professionally, but I did it for 5 years. I don't know if I said this the last time we talked, but one thing it allowed me to do, there were a couple of things it allowed me to do. One was the circuit rider. The second was I had quit. I'd stopped working on my master's at Georgia State because I lacked a thesis. What a surprise! Half the people do that.
Uh-huh.
And but also I was kind of offered a job, and so I took it without doing the thesis. And so in the interim,
And the job was the bird?
no, that was before the bird. I worked as at Eric Hill Associates as a city planner.
Oh, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And so in the time that I was at Eric Hill and then the Bird and then Searching Titles, Georgia State changed the requirements. They said all you have to do is take 2 more classes, 2 more courses. So I said, oh, well, okay, well, I'll come back and do that. So I took those 2 classes, and then I took some journalism classes. And during those 5 years. And then, I mean, is this what you want me to talk about right now?
Yeah.
Then I got a job doing a research project. I was hesitating because I was trying to remember how I learned of this job, but I think it was just through the progressive circles. Doing a research project on prison sentencing patterns in Georgia. They were doing this, it was an organization called the Southern Coalition on Jails and Prisons, and it was based in Nashville. They were doing this research project in a couple of states and looking at sentencing patterns. And so it was kind of housed with the Georgia ACLU. So I went over there and did that. Another thing I did during those 5 years is there was an organization here called the National Jury Project. It was a national organization. They had a chapter here or an office here. And they did jury selection work. In death penalty cases.
Mm-hmm.
They did it. They would do it for anybody, any attorney that would hire them to be a consultant with jury selection. But they did it mostly pro bono for death penalty cases. And so I helped them with a couple of as a volunteer, worked on that for a couple of death penalty cases. It was fascinating. I can't remember if I did that while I was searching titles or while I was doing the sentencing project. But anyway, we did this big sentencing project. It was pretty big, and got all this data from the state and mushed it around. And what a surprise, we discovered that black people are get longer sentences than white people. And so that was kind of the thrust of it. During that time, while I was doing that sentencing project, I also went down and did some interviewing of death row inmates. And
Down where?
well, at that time, death row was housed at Reedsville.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't really remember the purpose of that interviewing, but I'm sure it was important. It was not really part of my research project, but it was, I think it was something the ACLU was doing, and they just enlisted me to go do this interviewing. So that was really interesting. So I did that till that research project was over. The money ran out. During that time, I was involved with this guy, and I got pregnant. I birthed a baby, my first daughter. And
What year was that?
81. And I laughed because that was one of the few years that I had health insurance through this sentencing project. I said, oh, this is convenient. And so I birthed that baby, and then the project ran out, the funding ran out, and I couldn't decide what I was going to do next. But I said to myself, I really want to be a writer. I really want to be a writer, a journalist. And I don't want this little girl to grow up saying, I want to be able to say to my daughter that I did what I wanted to do. And so I said, I'm going to freelance. Oh. And I did get some actual, real assignments. It was pretty cool. During that I don't want to talk forever, but during that sentencing project, we had a conference on prison sentencing or prison issues. I can't remember the details. And Alice Walker came and spoke because she was a friend of the director of the sentencing project. This is also before she was a real big deal. She came and spoke, so I, with the journalism gene I had, asked if she would do an interview with me for WRFG, and so I did that. And then I turned it into, this is when we had a locally, AJC had a locally produced magazine. And somehow one of the editors there heard about it. I know, I turned the interview into something for Southern Exposure magazine that's out of North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
So he read that and asked me to do something for them. So I did a couple of things. I did stuff for Time magazine. I did stuff, but because I basically needed to earn a pretty good amount of money, I was basically our sole support.
You were a single mom?
Well, not in the beginning, but when she was 3-ish, we separated. Then, and I was the main breadwinner. And so I moved more into the realm of, I got some assignments from what I call business-to-business magazines or publications. And I got some really good paying assignments from IBM here with one of the best editors I've ever come in contact with. And so I did those. They were really well paid. They flew me to hither and yon to interview people that had bought a particular product. And then I was supposed to write a glowing story about how they were using this System 36. And but this editor, I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, wanted it to be well written and to have a compelling story. He didn't want just this fluff about the System 36 thing. Mm-hmm. And so it was a really good writing experience for me. And so I love doing those. Anyway, and then near the end of those 5 years, I fell into, because I needed to earn money, writing instruction manuals for mostly software, but for some hardware. Also, it was back in the days when they were paying really well for that work, and that an independent person could get hired on to do it. And so I did that, and in that process I divorced the father of that child, and then started dating somebody else, and married him just about the time I was finishing a big project for Georgia Pacific. And on our wedding day, we come back to the house we had just bought, and I get a phone call from this guy I knew at in my master's program at Georgia State. And he said, "Krista, I'm going to be, I'm taking this job as the editor for the Fulton County Daily Report, and I need to hire a managing editor. Would you like to apply for the job?" And I said, "Well, okay." And so I took that job, and it's when Stephen Brill was buying a whole series of these legal newspapers around the country, and he was transforming our old Fulton County Daily Report, the legal organ for the county, and continuing the legal ads, but also adding editorial content. So he was hiring a staff, and so he hired Steve Johnson as the editor, and then me, and then we had 5 reporters. And so I got started with that job.
What year would this be?
86. And but I also had she was then like something like 4.5 or something, and we wanted to have more children, and so I worked there a year. I got pregnant a little before I was planning to, and but I thought that job was just too. It was really a hectic job, and so I quit right before my second child was born, thinking I was going to look for a different job. Because I said, the data report is just too hard for me to have a preschool or a young child and a newborn. And so I quit thinking that I'd look for a different job afterwards. And but then we decided to have a third, and I never went back to work after that. So, and somewhere, and I skipped over in those 5 years that I was doing the searching titles. We did the circuit rider.
Mm-hmm.
So I just in these years I've just devoted myself, to raising those 3 children. And in the beginning of those years, I was heavily involved in volunteer work in their schools. And interestingly, there has been this thread of journalism all through. And when I was at Morningside, I helped start the
Morningside Elementary?
At Morningside Elementary, when my daughter was there, the Dolphin Dateline. It was a newsletter for parents. Then my kids eventually, and then ended up at Paideia, and we started this. By that time, email was becoming much more prevalent, and we started this email thing called ePie. And there was like a calendar of things that were going on and announcements and stuff like that. And then as the kids got on, do you want me to just bring it all up to the current, or where do you want me to go with all this?
Yeah, I'd like to.
I mean, you can say no.
No, I absolutely want to hear how your life has unfolded through the present.
Then as the kids got on up, I was on the board of their preschool, and then I was on the board. I mean, I did a lot of volunteer work.
What preschool did they go to?
They did Inman Park Preschool.
The co-op?
Yeah, the co-op in Inman Park. They mostly were at the children's school. I co-chaired the auction at the children's school. I really done a lot of stuff. Then over at Paideia, I did a couple of major volunteer jobs, and then I was on the board of trustees for 6 years. Did I say I was on the board at the preschool?
Mm-hmm.
Also, when we went through some drama. And as I rolled off the board of trustees, my friend was working at Georgia Wand, Women's Action for New Directions. And so she kind of talked me into going on that board. And I was on the board for 1 year, and then I chaired it for 7 years. It's really too long to be a board chair, but I didn't do board succession planning very well.
What year did you begin this?
2004.
Mm-hmm.
So for 8 years, I was on that board total. During the latter years, Juan's mission was to empower, it started out, the words were to empower women in the political process, to reduce military spending, and something, and to redirect federal spending for a more fair and just world, or something kind of like that. But the beginning was to involve women in the political process. And I said, oh, well, part of our mission is to involve women in the political process, so why don't we get involved in voter registration and get out the vote work? So we got really pretty heavily involved in that, partnering with some other progressive organizations, the Georgia Coalition for People's Agenda, some labor groups, Planned Parenthood. In different cycles, it was different groups, but always the Coalition for People's Agenda, which was chaired by Reverend Joseph Lowry. And so we did that for a couple of cycles. And during the later years of that time, I started learning about these structures in other states called state tables. The concept is for civic engagement, that different organizations come around a table and have a shared strategic plan for voter registration, voter mobilization, voter education, get out the vote work. So I said, oh my God, this is what we need in Georgia. So I started talking to a number of people, really, not to get too far down in the weeds about this, but one thing led to another. And we formed this collaboration of 501c3 groups, nonpartisan groups, that have as part of their mission civic engagement, to work strategically with 21st century tools and technology. A simple way to think about this structure is that we're not all setting up our card table in front of the same grocery store. And so we formed this organization called Pro Georgia that now has 34 groups that are either full or temporary partners that sit around the table, that work on a shared vision, that is nonpartisan, but we are progressive, and we work to involve communities of color, ethnic groups, women, and youth in the political process. And it's been a huge sea change in Georgia. We want to be statewide, but most of our groups, honestly, are focused in Atlanta. So I am still on the board of that organization. I'm very, very committed to it. It's been a pretty all-consuming project for me, and we hired our first staff person 5 years ago, and we've grown and ramped up in just a pretty amazing way. Partly we were able to learn from mistakes in other states that had built these structures. They exist in 25 other states in various forms. And so partly we were able to learn from best practices and from mistakes of other states, but also we were really lucky to hire our very first executive director, and the initial we invited 12 groups to come around the table, and they're all still with us, and they were very smart, very strategic thinkers, that individuals that actually sat around the table. So we've just done a really amazing job, and we're really proud of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I'm sure you all have a lot of eagerness in our present political moment.
yeah, I've also gotten a little bit involved with the Democratic Party, and sit on their state commit. I'm on their state committee, and so there's a, I really could talk forever about this, but we need I really don't, and I'm also somewhat involved in helping recruit particularly women, but to run for political office. And so I wear a couple of different kind of informal hats. But the thing I was going to say is I really don't care as much about whether an elected official is a Republican or a Democrat. What I care about are their values, their ethics, and the policies that they're going to implement. And in this state of Georgia, if we want to be a more fair, a more just state, and have a government that is more fair and just, a government that meets our needs, we need to, and has more progressive policies, we need to care about an educated voting base, but also the candidates that we elect. And once we elect them, we need to hold their feet to the fire and make sure they are implementing policies that are going to benefit all of us. And there was another point I was going to make about that, but anyway, so so we need a comprehensive strategy. We need our 501c3 groups, our nonpartisan groups, working in their lane, registering voters, educating voters, and making sure they get out to the polls in a nonpartisan way. We need our Democratic Party to be fully functioning and operational, and we need another range. We need another range of advocacy groups working to implement and to support and make sure we have good progressive policies in the state. So it's kind of an all of the above. We can't put all of our eggs in the nonpartisan basket. We can't put all of our eggs in the partisan basket. We need an all of the above strategy. So that is all consuming.
Yes.
And I'm just really lucky that I am in this space, that I have these kind of values, that I have this commitment, that I have a husband that supports me to do this kind of work. And so it is this underpinning, and it's kind of a arc or a thread from my fairly Southern liberal parents. And that's another thing I want to say, is that I'm pretty committed to this work in Georgia. I'm also on the, I don't really know how much I want to talk about this, but I'm also on the board of a national organization called Women Donors Network. And there are all kinds of opportunities to give money and to get involved on a national level. But I said, no, this is where I feel like this is where I'm going to stake my claim and do what I can. It's in the state of Georgia. And so, I'm very focused, and it's very targeted and very focused and almost hyper-focused on this work. But I'm also I've been doing a lot of thinking recently, and partly this conversation about the Great Speckled Bird is the lack of sort of alternative media in this city. And we love to criticize the AJC. But I think the AJC is doing a better job than they were doing, say, 10 years or even 5 years ago. But that's not to put too fine a point on them doing a great job. I think they're trying. They have more reporters down at the state capitol than they used to. They are sending reporters elsewhere whereas 10 years ago, I don't think they were. But nonetheless, there are so many stories that are either underreported or not reported. And it's a real lack. Creative loafing tries every once in a while, but they are creative loafing. Let's go. And so they don't really fill that space. And it's a real lack in this city.
Yeah, we have, Atlanta Progressive News, but there are like 2 people that write for that, I guess.
Yeah, they really can't. I don't want to say anything bad. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go back for a few minutes and recap. I know we talked briefly about it last time, but Circuit Rider. And I think we had determined that you and some of your collaborators started putting this out in probably about 78, maybe? Was that?
Yeah, probably. That, or maybe a little earlier. I could, let's see, it was when I was living down in Grant Park. I'm not going to come.
And this is when you would have been doing the title work?
Yes. And so there were 5 of us that formed a little group, and we put it out bi-weekly, every other week.
And who were the 5?
Leslie Fredman, Craig Rafuse, Sandra McIntyre, who was my roommate at the time, me, and I don't remember. She was great.
And how'd you all come together?
We just were friends and said, let's do it.
Okay.
And so we put out this thing that was a calendar. And in fact, I was just talking to Leslie about it the other day. She brought it up for some reason. It was a calendar of what we call progressive political events. But Leslie said, and I think this is true, we were beginning near the end of it to get more, to write short articles. Whether any of us have all those copies or not, I don't know. But did we mimeograph it? How did we make the copies? I guess we mailed it out. We got subscribers for $5 a year to help defray the cost. And we'd type it up and put it out. The name, Circuit Rider, we settled on because, and this was the idea came from me, because in the old days, Methodist ministers were called circuit riders. They rode from small settlement to small settlement to preach, but they also carried the news. And did I tell you this last time? That this made my dad so proud that we named it the Circuit Rider. And so why we stopped putting it out, I have no memory of that. Leslie may remember.
Were you putting this up? Was it being put out through the birth of your daughter, or in 81?
I have no memory. I just do not remember that. Leslie might remember it better, or maybe collectively. And Craig Rafuse is still in town. Sandra McIntyre, she moved and I've lost contact with her.
And was it largely a city calendar that you were putting out?
Yeah. Yeah. If Planned Parenthood was having an event, or if there was going to be a speaker coming through town, or that kind of stuff.
How many subscribers do you think you
I don't
you might have had?
I don't know. I have no idea. Leslie might remember better.
Mhm.
Or if we all sat down together, we might remember it collectively. The collective memory jog.
And so you were living in Grant Park. Had you moved? Because when we last checked in about your living, you were on Bonaventure in the group co-house.
Well, I don't remember. I was living in the house with on Bonaventure, and then I moved into a house that a boyfriend owned, but he was traveling a lot, but I was living there.
Mm-hmm.
And so technically, I guess we were living together.
And what part of town was that?
That was in Inman Park. I mean, Little Five Points. But then that relationship was kind of, I wanted to move out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Sandra and I rented this house down in Grant Park. I really should have kept a journal.
We
I
all
tell my
should.
I tell my children that's one of the regrets I have,
Mhm.
is that I didn't keep a diary or a journal. But anyway,
And when your daughter was born in 81, where were you?
that's when I moved in with her father, who we didn't get married, but we, in Georgia, we had, I don't know what the law is now, but it's very liberal common law marriage. And so, rules. And so we ended up getting a divorce when we separated, but we never really considered ourselves all that married.
Mm-hmm.
But we were living in Lake Claire when Aaron was born.
And then from there?
He and I separated. He moved out. I started seeing my current husband, my, man that I eventually married. And I sold the house that Bill and I owned together. I was living in that house until I married my current husband. And we bought a house together.
In what neighborhood now?
No. First we lived in we owned two houses in Virginia Highland, in Morningside. The first one we lived in, when we decided to have a third, we decided it was going to be too small, so we bought a bigger house. Then we eventually moved into the house we're living in now in Druid Hills.
Okay. And who is your current husband? And is he involved in any of all of your policy? And
He's not
political?
involved, but he's supportive.
Mm-hmm. That would have to be.
But yeah, he's quite progressive, and he was an attorney. He had a sole practice for many years, and he's recently retired. So.
Do you remember what I refer to as the reincarnated bird in 1984-85?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any recollection? Were you involved in that at all?
See, it was 84 and 85.
Yeah, I think so.
Well, those were the years I was, you know, pretty much a single bread earner, separating from my daughter's father. So I was pretty preoccupied. I was working pretty full-time, had the child, the young toddler preschooler. I was pretty preoccupied. I also, was not overly optimistic about the success of that effort. But I just didn't have any time or energy to put in to that.
What made you less than optimistic?
Well, it's a very capital-heavy, capital-intensive endeavor to start a brand-new newspaper. Back in the late 60s, they just started on, bubblegum and air, and it was a different economic time. The record companies were just looking for outlets to advertise, and the music industry was just begging for outlets to advertise. That was not the case in the 80s. We also had a big recession in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And not a big one, but one. And you just would have had to have had like a couple of $1 million. I don't know if they did much of a business plan or what, and I knew they didn't have that kind of money. And we had watched, print newspapers struggle and fail, or struggle and continue struggling all around the country. And what made us think that this was going to be successful without some huge backer with millions of dollars?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I wasn't too optimistic about it. It's too bad. It's too bad that we don't have a better alternative source of news. But as I said, there are plenty of stories that go unreported.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you maintained relationships with bird folks over the years?
Somewhat. Bob Goodman organizes us. They organized a 40th anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And I helped a little bit with that. And these the exhibits, Tom and Stephanie and Bob and Steve, they really drove the whole thing. But I was kind of tagging along and kind of helping with, in ways that I could. Partly, and Stephanie, I appreciated her encouraging me to be involved because they had the voice and the perspective from the earlier days of the bird, but there weren't that many, they didn't have much of a voice from the experience with the later days. So I did what I could with this 40th anniversary, and then I think Bob decided to have these reunions every year, and these small reunions. And there's a little bit of talk about trying to do something for the 50th, but I don't know if we're going to, I don't know. I haven't heard any more about that. Most years I go out to the little reunion in June.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I stay in contact also, like, in the sense that I'll see Bob at demonstrations or at events, or Tom and Stephanie, and of course Nan. I see Nan a lot. We're in a reading group together. Another person that was on the Bird, and Mickey Gilmore, we're in a reading group. So there are a couple of women.
Is she in the same reading group with Nan?
Yeah. So there's Mickey Gilmore and Teresa Secules and me that were all on the Bird staff. Cynthia Cameron is also in our reading group, and she was tangentially involved in the Bird. She came over and did a dressograph, and her brother was there some too. And then Kathy Klein's in our reading group, Cliff's wife. Who else? Mary Britting. She was kind of around the Bird, but I don't know that she was ever on staff. If she was, it was before my time, or maybe after my time too. So I would say I'm still in the circles.
Yeah, that sounds like a very strong group.
Yeah.
And a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think you have certainly spoken to this in talking about the work that you've been doing, particularly over the last decade, 15 years. But I'll ask it anyway in case it elicits something different or further. What are some of the ideas and ideals that mean a great deal to you now?
Well, fairness, justice, an equitable society, a fair and just society. Where people have a fair shot, have a fair chance. This growing wealth disparity is, very disturbing. Gender and racial equality. Are key. And I think, more and more I'm beginning to understand the importance of kind of shoring up and possibly having to save our democracy. When I started this civic engagement work, I thought it was important, but I did not understand the depth of the importance of it as the political situation has evolved. I'm just appreciating more and more the really critical aspect of the saving of our republic, and of our democratic form of government, and that when you look at how the influence of money in politics, how it is skewing the functioning of our democracy, and also the way our election districts are drawn with through politicians get to pick their voters through our system of reapportionment and redistricting, and how that is undermining the real fabric of our democracy. And so I feel like because of this work in voter education and civic engagement, I find myself in this really critical crossroads. And these groups that are fellow travelers with me are really in this critical crossroads. Not that we are doing it, it's all on our shoulders, because there are a number of groups and individuals that are concerned, but it really is time for us to wake up to the really critical nature of this work. We used to think, oh, registering voters, that's a nice thing to do. No, now we're thinking it is an essential thing to do. And so I guess those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah.
So when I started this civic engagement work when I was turning 65, and I said, I'm going to do this full tilt until I'm 70. And then I've just turned 70 last month. And I said, I'll do it full tilt for 5 years. And then I may quit altogether, I may redirect, or I may keep on, but I'll reevaluate. So when I turned 70, I did reevaluate. And I think that I'm going to course correct in certain ways, but I've decided now to go full tilt another 5 years, and then see where I am, at the next 5 years. And I really love this. This is the first time I've ever done this 5-year kind of increment, but I am thrilled with this concept.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of readjusting a little bit, but I have decided that I'm not abandoning this civic engagement, and I might change the term to democracy work. Mm-hmm. I've decided I'm not going to course correct so dramatically that I'm going to leave behind that work. So that's where I am.
Well, good. Thank you for it.
And, many people in the Bird, Bob Goodman stayed involved in activist work, Tom and Stephanie to a degree. Some have not done anything since the Bird. But when we had the 40th reunion, and I'll say this and then I'm really going to stop, unless you have some other pressing questions, the people that had been on paid staff had a breakfast brunch the next morning. We had the events on a Saturday evening, I think. And then the paid staff were all invited to this brunch thing. And I don't know, there were like 50 people that came. We sat around a big circle in a room that's bigger than this, out at the East Lake Commons. Mm-hmm. And they all went around and said their name and said what they were, 2 or 3 sentences about what they were doing. And I was really struck by the number that were still involved politically in progressive work. Mm-hmm. It may not be their day job, but it was something that they, and it was not 100%. But I was struck by the number of people that were still activists, that would still identify themselves as activists. So that was cool.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that we have covered all the ground of the many little questions and ideas I had. If you have anything else that you'd like to share.
No, I think I've said my piece.
Well, I certainly thank you for coming in twice now.
Well, it's because
bearing with me.
It's because I talk so much, maybe. But it was fun to reflect back.
Okay, so we're coming back for 1 second. I had one question after we turned the camera off. Following up on your work with the prison projects and that sort of an analytical work. And I asked, when you were working you had mentioned the ACLU, and I said, oh, were you working with Gene Guerrero there, who had been involved with the Bird? And with the prison project, that was privately funded, or
It
foundation, or?
It was separately funded, but the Georgia part of it was hosted, I guess it would be the right way to say it, by the Georgia ACLU.
Okay.
They could have been our fiscal sponsors. I don't know that. I don't remember.
Do you know where the office was that you were working out of?
on Farley Street. No, 55 Wall. It was right over here. 55.
Yeah. So was that Al Horn's off? Was he?
No.
No.
Al Horn. Well, he might have been there at some point, but where I remember him was in the Healy building.
Okay.
They had a progressive law firm.
Yeah.
And they were on the 15th floor of the Healy building. I think the 15th floor.
Because and also with the jury.
The jury project was
jury
in the
project.
Healy building too.
Yeah, and were you working alongside Roger Friedman at all on that?
Roger was involved with the jury project, right?
Yeah, because I remember I've interviewed him and he talked about this. So I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about these connections after the Bird for all of you all, and here you are working on other projects with Gene and Roger and.
Yeah, well, it was kind of part of this progressive left community here in Atlanta. I don't know how Roger got involved with the jury project, but I was only tangentially involved because I helped them with those death row cases, trials. But so the prison sentencing project was physically housed at the ACLU of Georgia, and I think we were considered sponsored by the Georgia ACLU, and Gene was the director. And it was a very vibrant ACLU chapter. They had a lot of work. They had a lot of volunteer lawyers doing death penalty cases. It's when Patsy Morris was heading up the ACLU death penalty project. And it was just a very vibrant and vital chapter in the city. And so, yeah, it was just kind of, and then Al Horn's and Bob Giolito, they were on the 15th floor, the jury project. It was just all one big clump of folks milling around and moving from issue to issue and job to job. Is that kind of what you were?
Yeah, I just wanted to get this.
And Gene was this really amazing executive director of the Georgia ACLU. He was very intense and very high energy. He wasted no minute. He did not waste 60 seconds of his work day. It was amazing to watch or to overhear it if I was working in the other room. It was amazing. Mm-hmm. And it was quite a time to be working, kind of in tandem with the ACLU. Rick Reed was the head or ED or whatever of this prison sentencing project. Mm-hmm. And so he was in there with us. And so.
Well, thank you. I
think, that people that had, that were around the Bird, and the Bird was kind of the epicenter of the progressive left, of the left wing of Atlanta, the political left. And it was also kind of the epicenter of sort of a social world swirl also. But and so people left the Bird, people went to law school, people, got married, had children, but many people kind of stayed in contact and in friendship and in solidarity with each other. It was never as tight and high energy as it was around with the Bird as the epicenter, but still there was this kind of amorphous professional social scene, an activist scene. I maybe should mention that first. That really is still in existence today.
Yeah.
We're just smaller, and some new people have come in, but we have that thread from those early days of the Great Speckled Bird.
No, that's fantastic. And a great way to end. Thank you.
The end. Well, you're very welcome.